One Ontario doctor has lost his medical license for doing exactly what radical trans activists would want him to do, while yet another doctor was vindicated for doing the right thing. Now, this is a rare moment, in 2018 when sanity has prevailed, and I think we all need to take a moment to stop and appreciate it. A London, Ontario doctor who specializes in transgender care has been stripped of his medical license and fined $6,000. Dr. James Martin also agreed to never apply for a medical license in Ontario or anywhere else ever again. The Ontario College of Physicians and Surgeons received 2 complaints in 2016. Now, according to CTV News, during that time, Dr. Martin was seeing about 30 patients a week at his practice that focuses on transgender care and hormone replacement therapy. Now, in the first complaint, an adolescent female-to-male transgender patient came in seeking a mastectomy. This is a minor child, and Dr. Martin prescribed the child cross-sex hormones at the very first appointment. The complaint said Dr. Martin didn't give the young patient time to think about the risks of the treatment and didn't bother to assess the child's mental health. He just whipped out his prescription pad for puberty blockers and testosterone and sent the child out the door into the world. The second complaint against Dr. Martin stems from another time he prescribed cross-sex hormones to a patient on the first visit after meeting the person for all of a whopping 30 minutes. Now, this isn't Dr. Martin's first go-round with bad medicine, though. In 2016, he was ordered to have a clinical advisor for his work in transgender care. The Ontario Health Ministry also expressed concerns about Dr. Martin's billing practices. And Dr. Martin moved into transgender care because in a former life, he was a fertility doctor, and he was disciplined in 2014 for over-treating his female patients with intrauterine insemination. But being a weirdo doctor, I think, is the family business. Dr. Martin's wife lost her medical license for 2 years after she mistreated more than 20 of her patients, including one whose remaining ovary was removed by her husband, that's the aforementioned Dr. Martin, without the patient's consent. On the flip side, though, is Dr. Kenneth Zucker, who headed up the Family Gender Identity Clinic for more than 30 years in Toronto. He was fired in 2015 because under his tutelage, the clinic focused on watchful waiting and education, as opposed to immediate medical intervention when it came to minors who identified as transgender. Activists accused him of practicing conversion therapy and abuse, whereas Dr. Zucker said he was treating each patient on a case-by-case basis, and he even expressed fear that the field of gender dysphoria has been poisoned by politics. And this week, Dr. Zucker was vindicated and received an apology from the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. Oh, and a $500,000 settlement to cover his damages, legal fees, and interest. Dr. Zucker was right not to bow to political and activist pressure in the face of scientific data. And Brown University was absolutely wrong to throw science out the window and bend a knee to the outrage mob when they pulled a peer-review study at the behest of transgender activists. Now, the National Review Online reports the study described a new phenomenon called rapid onset gender dysphoria, when a young person who did not show signs of gender dysphoria in childhood develops symptoms suddenly and rapidly after puberty. The study's author said there was reason to believe that some may be suffering from underlying and pre-existing psychiatric conditions. That sort of thing you treat with therapy and maybe psychiatric drugs and not cross-sex hormones and medical intervention. And that's pretty reasonable considering the next thing I'm about to show you. This is an article written by Dr. James Cantor, who is a clinical psychologist and sexual behavior scientist. He's the director of the Toronto Sexuality Centre and an associate professor of psychiatry at the University of Toronto. Let's read from it just a little bit. Despite differences in country, culture, decade, and follow-up length and method, all of the studies have come to a remarkably similar conclusion. Only a few, very few transgender kids still want to transition by the time they're adults. Instead, they generally turn out to be regular gay or lesbian folks. The exact number varies by study, but roughly 60 to 90% of all trans kids turn out no longer to be trans by adulthood. And then Dr. Cantor lists all the major studies in his article by outcome. First off, let me tell you, my religious and personal beliefs aside, I don't care. I really don't care what a consenting adult does as long as I'm not compelled to do anything about it, that I'm not compelled to use speech or words I disagree with, that religious institutions like churches and schools are not required or compelled by law to do anything about someone else's life or lifestyle choice that would violate their conscience. And I don't ever want to be compelled to pay for any of it. That's it. You don't want my opinion? Don't ask me to pay for it. And don't use the strong arm of the government to make me care. And let me say, I think any child, actually any person, but especially children, struggling with their gender identity must be treated with compassion and understanding and patience. But carving into children with scalpels, stopping their natural puberty, and injecting them with cross-sex hormones before their little brains are fully formed and their opinions of their own body have even solidified is absolutely child abuse. It's Mengele stuff. It's not compassion, it's not understanding, and it is not patience, but it is exactly what the transgender activist movement advocates for. Children can't vote. Children can't serve in the military. Children can't drive because as a society, we've acknowledged that they aren't mature enough to the extent that we don't even allow them to get their ears pierced without parental consent. And here are doctors doing irreparable chemical and structural damage to children based on decisions these kids are making today that the statistics show they will overwhelmingly change their mind about in just a few short years. And there is a great irony in an entire movement dedicated to the idea that gender and sexuality is fluid, now requiring doctors and scientific studies to affirm and solidify gender differences through surgery and chemicals, rendering the differences permanent and not fluid. But this week, common sense prevailed. Is it a changing of the tide? I don't know. I'm hopeful, but we should appreciate every win every time we get one. For the Rebel.media, I'm Sheila Gunn Reid. What you just saw there is the daily video that I do here at The Rebel, but did you know that I have my own weekly full-length show? It's aptly called The Gun Show, and we talk about issues facing Canadian families that the mainstream media just won't touch with a 10-foot pole. But to get access to my show and the rest of our incredible premium content, treat yourself to a Rebel subscription today.